think nowadays, if you would ask the same question 5 or 10 years ago, very few people would have known what flow is. But now it's kind of becoming a little more common in the lingua franca. We're seeing it more out there in the world. And there's a number of reasons for it. Changes in technology and science and research has really brought some of this stuff to the forefront. But for those of you that still don't know, like what flow is defined as is this like optimal psychological experience where we perform at our very best, and that inherently makes us feel really good. This is something that's driven by intrinsic motivation. So people that get into flow do it because they're working on something that they legitimately want to do, regardless of any kind of reward or benefit for doing it. And most of us have experienced it in one domain of life or another. Maybe it's while you were working. I work with a lot of software engineers. They're really good at kind of hacking their flow state. Artists and athletes are particularly good at it. You guys, I don't know if people are closer to my age and they remember the era of Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan called it being in the zone, where the basket felt so big that all he had to do was throw the ball up there and it would go into the hoop. John Coltrane, the jazz musician, called it being in the pocket, when he knew he could tell what notes were going to be played by one of the people in his quintet before it even happened. Robin Williams and a lot of improv comics call it being in the forever box. If you're a runner, you've probably experienced it. It's the runner's high. It's this state where like you're performing so well and time kind of melts away. You're so immersed in what you're doing that you lose sense of time and you perform really, really well. But that's the psychological side. What makes flow so interesting now is that neuroscientists have started to kind of take over this discipline, right? And what Mihai Csikszentmihalyi kind of identified in his flow theory in the 70s, in the 2010s, has now started to be validated by neuroscience. And they've actually, thanks to fMRI and brain imaging, they've been able to identify it in the brain. And what neuroscientists call it is something called transient hypofrontality. At least that's the hypothesis. And the prefrontal cortex of the brain is where we house all of our rational thought, our analytical thinking, our ego, our sense of self. And one would think that when you're in a state of optimal performance, your analytical brain is operating really, really effectively. But what's actually happening is that part of the brain is slowing down and almost turning off. That's why it's hypo, not hyperfrontality. So, and transient means it's temporary. So the front of the brain, the kind of ego and the analytical thinking slows down. The amygdala and the kind of more mammalian, primitive parts of our brain turn on. And then there's this really fascinating cascade of neurochemicals and neuroelectricity that takes place. Our brain waves start slowing down. And when we get into flow, we're operating in like a theta state of brainwave, which is the same brainwaves you would have in REM sleep, or if you're deep into transcendental meditation. So we're literally operating at this really low frequency brainwave. And then at the same time, there's this cascade of neurochemicals that go through our bodies. So if you think of how flow happens, right? We start with a struggle. So we have some type of stress or struggle that we have to overcome. And then we start getting comfortable with that struggle. And we have this stage of relief where we're okay, we're starting to feel good in the struggle. And then once we really start performing well in that state, we'll drop into flow. And then, of course, there needs to be a recovery since it's a transient state, so we can do it again in the future. But if you think of that struggle, release, flow, recovery cascade, there are these cool neurochemicals that happen along the way. So in the struggle, we feel stress, our bodies release cortisol, they release norepinephrine or adrenaline, right? We get fired up, we're thinking the saber-toothed tiger is chasing us, we have to react to it. We start getting comfortable in that environment, so our brains release nitric oxide. We start to get a little bit calmer. We drop into flow. Our bodies release dopamine, which is our natural endogenous happy chemical, but also it releases anandamide. And anandamide is one of our body's endogenous endocannabinoids. So I always joke with people when I'm talking about this is when you get into flow, you're actually kind of getting high on your own supply, right? Like you are literally producing this endocannabinoid that, along with dopamine, that makes you feel happy and calm and focused and relaxed. And then, of course, at the end, you get some serotonin, you feel calm and mellow, oxytocin, the bonding chemical that we get from love and affection. And we've gone through this like incredible, like neuroelectrical, neurochemical cycle that takes us from a state of anxiety and agitation to a state of performing at our absolute peak to then a natural recovery state so we can eventually, hopefully, do it again in the future.